"Apologize to my sister or get out of my house," my husband ordered at dinner. I rose, faced her, and calmly delivered one sentence that shattered 3 marriages, including the one I thought was forever. Bree beat my deadline by 2 hours and 46 minutes. She was in my driveway at 6:14 the next morning, barefoot on the cold concrete, still in the champagne-colored dress from her brother's 40th, mascara dried in 2 gray tracks down her jaw. She held a Nike shoebox against her chest like it was a baby, and taped to the lid was a child's crayon drawing. A yellow house, a gray truck, and off in the corner, a second, smaller house, labeled in wobbly 6-year-old handwriting, "Dad's other house." I stood in my doorway in Daniel's old college sweatshirt with the coffee pot gurgling behind me, and I looked at that drawing for maybe 4 seconds before my legs decided they weren't interested in holding me anymore. I sat down on the step, just sat right there in front of the woman who'd spent 7 years asking about my little job in a voice pitched for the whole table. "Tess," she said. Her voice came out wrecked. "I need you to understand something before you open this." "No," I said. "You don't get a preamble." She flinched like I'd swung at her. "Give me the box, Bree." She gave me the box. At 6:13 that morning, I thought my husband had lied to me about money. I thought he'd bailed out his baby sister, who'd never in her life finished anything she started, and hidden it because he knew I'd be furious, and that Carol had covered for him the way she'd been covering for Daniel since he was 9 and broke a neighbor's window. I thought the lie was $31,000 deep. $31,000 is survivable. It's a bad year, an apology, a joint account with 2 signatures required. I had actually rehearsed forgiving him. That's the part I'm most ashamed of. Driving home from that party with my hands still shaking on the wheel of my Honda Accord, I'd already started drafting the terms of his return. Then Bree handed me a shoebox. Inside, in no order at all, the way you pack when you're panicking, a lease for Unit 4B at 1120 Wexler Street in Delaware, Ohio, $1,475 a month, signed on a line that said "Guarantor" in my husband's handwriting. 2 years of receipts from a Kroger 40 minutes north of us. An invoice from Sunbridge Montessori for the spring term, $3,860, marked "Paid, thank you." And under all of it, held together with a purple hair tie, a stack of photographs somebody had printed at a drugstore kiosk, because that's what you do when you can't keep something on your phone. A boy, maybe 2 years old in the first ones, 6 in the last. He had Daniel's ears. He had Daniel's terrible cowlick, the one Carol always said came from her side. In one photo, he sat on a picnic blanket with a woman I'd never seen, laughing at something off camera, and behind them, out of focus but unmistakable, was my husband's gray Tacoma with the dent in the tailgate he got backing into a bollard at Home Depot in 2019 and swore he'd fix. I remember the sound I made. It wasn't crying. It was more like the noise you make when you step off a curb you didn't know was there. "His name is Theo," Bree said. I didn't answer. My hands had gone cold and stupid. I couldn't get the hair tie back around the photos, and I kept trying, over and over, like that was the emergency. "Tess, say something." "How long?" 7 years in October. 7 years in October. We got married in September, 8 years ago. I did the arithmetic on my front step while the sprinklers came on across the street at the Mendozas, and a garbage truck downshifted somewhere on Halloway. 11 months. He made it 11 months before there was a second address. "The money," I said. My voice came out flat and reasonable, like a woman reading a grocery list. "The $31,000. That was last year's." Bree wouldn't look at me. "Tess, there's more. It's been every year." "How much?" "I don't know the total." "How much, Bree?" "I don't know." And then, quieter. "A lot. 200 maybe, over the whole time. I need you to understand what my life had looked like for 7 years, because otherwise the rest of this sounds like the story of a woman who should have known. I'm a surgical scheduler at a hospital system in Columbus. 16 years. I'm the person who fits a 9-hour spinal fusion and 2 emergency appendectomies into a day that only has so many hours and so many anesthesiologists in it. I notice when a number doesn't reconcile. I notice when a story changes. For 7 years, I noticed everything about Daniel Prewitt and filed all of it under a heading his own family handed me. "You're difficult. You're suspicious. You count things." Daniel was a regional sales director for a medical device distributor, Tuesday to Thursday on the road, most weeks. He was charming the way men who sell things to hospitals are charming. He remembered everybody's kids' names. He overtipped, and he told the story about driving 9 hours through an ice storm to my father's funeral in a way that made him the hero of it. I used to love that story. Gerald, Carol's second husband, 19 years, retired HVAC contractor. Hands like leather. The only one of them who ever asked me a follow-up question, used to catch my eye across the table whenever Carol started in on me and give me this small, apologetic shrug. Gerald matters later. Bree's husband, Marcus Ferraro, ran a 2-truck landscaping company and coached their son's baseball team and had the exhausted look of a man doing all the load-bearing in a marriage. They had 2 kids. Owen was 8. Lily was 5. Marcus matters later too. So there I was at 6:40 in the morning with photographic evidence of a second child in a shoebox. And here's the thing I did next that I still don't fully understand. I made Bree coffee. She sat at my island in that ruined dress with her feet dirty from my driveway, and I put a mug in front of her and asked the only question that mattered. "Why are you here?" "Because you're going to find it anyway," she said. "Find what?" She started crying then. Real crying. The ugly kind. With her hand pressed flat over her mouth. "Marcus can't know," she said. Here is what I told myself for the next 4 days. Maybe there's a version of this where I don't blow up 4 people's lives. I thought about Owen and Lily. I thought about Gerald, 71, who'd built a deck onto our house for free the summer we moved in and wouldn't take gas money. I thought about a 6-year-old who had done nothing to anybody. And I thought, maybe I just leave, quietly. Take my half, take the dog, take the story with me. So on Monday, I gave Daniel 1 chance. Exactly 1. I want that on the record. He came home at 6:20 that evening. He'd been at his mother's since the party. Carol had left me a voicemail Sunday, 90 seconds in that warm church lady register of hers, explaining that I had humiliated a good man in front of his own family and would be expected to apologize before this goes further. Daniel walked in, set his keys in the bowl, and said, "Are we going to be adults about this?" I said, "Tell me about Wexler Street." I watched it happen. There's a thing a face does when a person realizes he's been beaten and decides, in real time, to keep playing anyway. It isn't panic, it's recalculation. His eyes went unfocused for half a second, the way they did when he was doing pricing in his head on a call. Then he said, "That's a client property." A client property. Mid-Ohio Surgical. We put visiting reps up there. Tess, this is what I've been telling you. You find a lease and you build a whole. He made a spiraling gesture with his hand near his temple. This is not healthy. Show me the invoice. And he did. That's the kind of man I'd married. He didn't sputter. He went to his laptop and in under 4 minutes produced a PDF invoice from Kestrel Consulting Group LLC to Mid-Ohio Surgical Supply, $4,425, temporary housing and per diem, Q1, logo, invoice number, remit to details, and turned the screen toward me with the patient, wounded expression of a man being asked to prove he isn't a monster. "Kestrel," I said. "It's a vendor. Bree's boutique was going to be called Kestrel." He didn't move. The refrigerator hummed. Upstairs, the dog scratched at something. "Get some sleep," he said finally. "You're not yourself." He slept in the guest room. At 2:47 a.m., I got up and photographed every page in that shoebox on the counter under the pendant light, emailed the images to an address nobody in that family would ever guess, then put the originals in a gallon freezer bag and drove them to my friend Danai's before work. They lived in her garage refrigerator for 11 weeks. That was the first genuinely smart thing I did. Everything before it was just surviving. Tuesday, I called a lawyer, Priya Raghunathan, 19 years in family law, corner office on Broad Street with a view of a parking garage. She read my folder for 11 minutes without saying anything, which, if you've ever sat across a desk while a professional reads about your life, is the longest 11 minutes there is. Then she took off her glasses and said, "Okay, 2 things. 1, in Ohio, this is dissipation of marital assets, and it is very much recoverable. 2, she tapped the Kestrel invoice, this is the part that should scare him, and I don't think he knows it yet. Why? Because if he generated this to justify the payments to his employer, then he didn't just steal from you, he stole from them, and they have lawyers who bill more than I do." She told me 4 things. Pull every statement I could legally access, 7 years back. Write a timeline. Dated, boring, no adjectives, because the more boring it reads, the more a judge believes it. Stay in the house and expect them to reach the family with their version first. Then one thing not to do. Don't confront anybody else until she said so. I broke that one. I'll get to it. She gave me a name too. Nadia Okwuosa, CPA, certified in financial forensics. 22 years, mostly divorce and small business fraud. Nadia charged $310 an hour. I couldn't really afford her. I hired her anyway. Nadia's first report came back 9 days later, 14 pages. I read it in my car in the hospital lot at 7:15 in the morning with the defroster going and my breakfast uneaten in the cup holder. $600. That was the number. Over 6 years and 8 months, $214,600 had left accounts that were legally half mine, and it went out in ways designed to look boring. Transfers under $9,000, a recurring $1,475 ACH labeled storage unit, a business loan to Kestrel Consulting Group LLC, an Ohio entity registered in 2019, whose statutory agent address was a UPS store box, with one listed member, not Daniel, Bree Ferraro. He'd put it in his sister's name. Of course, course he had. If it ever came apart, the paper said, Bree. And then, on page 9, the part that made me put my hand over my mouth in a Honda Accord at 7 in the morning. Nadia had flagged 4 incoming transfers to Kestrel that did not come from any account of mine or Daniel's. They came from a joint money market account at Heartland Credit Union. Carol and Gerald's retirement, $40,000, in 4 withdrawals, over 5 years, every one of them requiring 2 signatures. Gerald had never signed anything. I want to talk about the shaking, because nobody tells you about the shaking. For 6 weeks, I had a tremor that came and went with no relationship to how calm I felt. I could be standing at the OR board and my left hand would just start going. Dr. Halverson, Aaron Halverson, LCSW, the therapist I started seeing in week 3 at Priya's very firm suggestion, said it was my nervous system finishing a fight my brain had already decided not to have. She also said something I've thought about probably 500 times since. You keep asking me whether you're crazy, she said. You've asked me some version of that in every session. Has it occurred to you that you're asking me to do a job that 11 other people were supposed to do? You keep asking me whether you're crazy, she said. You've asked me some version of that in every session. Has it occurred to you that you're asking me to do a job that 11 other people were supposed to do? I paid a licensed clinical social worker $145 a session to tell me I wasn't crazy, which, said out loud, is the most expensive thing that family ever did to me. Those session notes mattered later. Not in the way you'd think. Here is where it turned, and where it stopped being about money. 2 weeks after Nadia's report, on a Thursday, I drove to Delaware, Ohio. I told myself I was only going to look. I parked one building down from 1120 Wexler at 4:40 in the afternoon, and sat there with the windows up like an absolute lunatic. And at 5:05, a silver Elantra pulled into a numbered space. The woman who got out was maybe 5 years younger than me, lanyard around her neck, scrubs with dogs on them. She handed a backpack to a boy who immediately dropped it and started walking backwards while talking, the way kids do when the story can't wait for logistics. And she laughed. She laughed at whatever he was saying, and she tipped her head back doing it. And I watched a woman I had never met be happy in a parking lot, and I understood instantly in my whole body that she didn't know either. You want to know what broke me? Not the photos, not the $214,600. It was that laugh, because I knew that laugh. That's the laugh of somebody who thinks her life is basically fine. I sat there another 40 minutes. Then I did the thing Priya told me not to do. I knocked on the door of Unit 4B. Her name was Alyssa Crane, 34, dental hygienist at a practice in Powell. She opened the door with a dish towel over her shoulder and the polite half smile you give a stranger. And I said, "My name is Tessa Prewitt. I think we should talk about Daniel." And I watched that smile die in stages, like a house losing power room by room. She let me in. That's the part that still gets me. She let me in because some part of her had been waiting years for somebody to come to that door. Theo was in the bedroom with a tablet. She turned the volume up for him. Then she sat down across from me and said, "He told me he was divorced." I put my phone on the table and turned it around. Our wedding photo. September, 8 years ago. Me in my mother's veil. She looked at it a long moment and said very quietly, "Okay, just that. Okay." The sound of a woman's entire biography being revised. And then she did something I did not expect and have never stopped being grateful for. She got up, went to a closet, and came back with a plastic bin. "He said his ex was unstable," she said, setting it down. "He said she'd taken him for everything. He said she made things up about him, that she'd shown up at his work once. I felt sorry for him. She made things up about him. He'd been running the same play on both of us for 7 years. He'd told her I was crazy and told me she was a client property, and every single time either of us noticed something, there was a woman in another town being handed a reason. In that bin, 3 years of texts she'd screenshotted just because, a Father's Day card, a photo of Daniel at Theo's 4th birthday in a paper hat, and, this is the one, a letter from Sunbridge Montessori addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Prewitt, thanking them for their family's continued support. And Carol was in one of the birthday photos. Carol, in a folding chair, holding a plate, smiling at a boy in a paper hat, with a wrapped present on her lap, and a look on her face I had literally never once received in 7 years of Sunday dinners. I can't describe what happened in my chest when I saw that. It wasn't rage. Rage came later. It was more like the floor of a building being removed while you're standing on the 4th story. Every Sunday. We just want what's best for Daniel. Every time that woman looked at me across the table and let me sit there being the problem. She'd been to that boy's birthday party. Alyssa said, "That's Carol. She comes for birthdays." She told me she was sorry she couldn't come more, that she had a lot going on with her husband's health. Gerald's health is fine. Gerald plays pickleball 3 mornings a week. I drove home doing 40 and a 55 with my hazards on because I couldn't stop shaking hard enough to hold a lane, pulled into a speedway lot until it passed, and called Priya's after-hours line and left a message I'm told was 4 minutes and 19 seconds long. The next morning she she called me back and said 7 words that changed the shape of everything. Don't tell them what you know. Yet, they got to the family first. Of course they did. I found out sideways from the softest person in that family. Gerald called on a Saturday and asked, in a voice working very hard to be casual, whether I'd been getting enough sleep lately. Who told you I wasn't sleeping? Long pause. Carol said you'd had an episode at the party. An episode. Here's what they'd built while I was driving to Delaware and paying a forensic accountant. For 3 weeks, Daniel had been telling people, in a tone of enormous sadness, that his wife was going through something, that I'd been obsessing, that I'd gotten into his files, that I'd made a scene in front of 50 people, which was true, and which is what made the rest stick. They never had to invent a scene. I'd handed them one. Aunt Deb told a cousin I'd been checked out somewhere for a bit, direct quote. Then on a Tuesday at 8:50 in the evening, 2 Franklin County deputies knocked on my door for a welfare check. They were polite. One of them, a young guy named Deputy Alvarado, had the decency to look embarrassed. Somebody had called in concerned that I was not safe with myself and not making sense. Was I having thoughts of hurting myself? No. Were there firearms in the home? No. Was there anyone they could call for me? And I said, with my hands behind my back so they couldn't see them shaking, I don't think so. No, they were gone in 10 minutes. They were kind. It doesn't matter how kind they were. I stood in my own front hall afterward with the porch light throwing 2 long rectangles across the floor, and I thought, very clearly, he is going to win, because that's what that call was. It wasn't concern. It was a document being created. It was a man building a record so that in 4 months, when I said my husband has a second family and took $200,000, somebody could say, well, there was a welfare check in April. Dr. Halverson got me in at noon the next day. Then she did something I never asked for, a 2-page clinical summary on letterhead, dated, describing my presentation across 7 sessions, using the phrase, no indication of thought disorder, delusional ideation, or self-harm risk at any point in treatment. Presentation consistent with acute situational stress secondary to marital deception. Priya called it the best $200 I'd ever spent. It became Exhibit F. Meanwhile, Bree folded. She stopped answering me on a Thursday. Then on Saturday, she sent one text. I never gave you anything. I don't know what you're talking about. Please leave my family alone. Carol had gotten to her, and I knew exactly how. Because Carol's leverage on Bree was never love. Carol co-signed their mortgage in 2021, and Bree had never in her life had a plan that didn't have her mother's signature somewhere on it. So the story had a shape that worked for all of them now. The unstable in-law, going through something, making accusations about the sister-in-law she'd harassed in front of 50 witnesses. I tried one more time to fix it without detonating anything, because people always ask why I didn't just leave. I drove to Carol's on a Sunday afternoon when I knew Gerald was at pickleball, and I sat in the kitchen where I'd washed dishes at 100 family dinners and said, I know about Theo. I know about the 40,000 from Heartland. I won't burn this down if you and Daniel come to the table. Carol is 73 years old and has excellent posture. She set down her tea, looked at me with an expression I'd never seen on her, and said the sentence that ended any chance any of them had. Nobody is going to believe a scheduler. Not you're wrong. Not how dare you. Nobody is going to believe a scheduler. I said, does Gerald know you signed his name? And that was the only moment I ever saw the mask come off all the way. Her jaw set. Her hand went flat on the table. Get out of my house, she said, which, as it turned out, ran in the family. I walked out, got in my car, laughed for about 1.5 miles, then pulled over and threw up in a CVS parking lot. Third exit I'd offered them. Third one refused. I stopped offering. What I did instead, over the next 5 weeks, was boring. Nadia pulled 6 years and 8 months of records. Priya subpoenaed the Kestrel bank records. Alyssa sent me everything in the plastic bin, photographed and time-stamped, with a note that said, whatever you need, I'm in. And Denise Alcott, the registrar at Sunbridge Montessori, confirmed under subpoena that 6 terms of tuition had been paid from an account ending in 4471, and that the emergency contact on file for Theo Crane was a woman named Carol Prewitt, listed as grandmother, on a form, in her own handwriting. Then, in mid-May, Nadia found the piece that turned a divorce into something with a case number. Bree's other account, the one I'd bluffed about at that party, because honestly, I had one screenshot and a hunch, was real. Business checking at a credit union in Hilliard, opened under Kestrel Consulting Group LLC, sole signer Bree Ferraro. Money in from Daniel, money out to the Wexler Street landlord and Sunbridge Montessori, but 11% of it went somewhere else. Bree had been skimming, $23,400 over 4 years, moved out in amounts small enough not to trip anything, into her personal account, and from there into a storage unit, a Sephora habit, and, in 3 transactions last fall, a credit card Marcus didn't know existed. And on March 3rd, 2 months before I found any of this, Bree Ferraro liquidated $18,400 from two 529 college savings plans, Owen's and Lily's, her own kids, because Daniel had asked her to float a quarter's worth of the second household while a commission check cleared, and Bree, who had never once in her life said no to her brother or her mother, took her children's college money and floated it. I read that page 4 times. I was standing at my kitchen counter and I heard myself say out loud, in an empty house, "Oh, you poor stupid woman." I meant it. I hated her and I pitied her in the same breath, and both were completely sincere. Everything came to a point on a Friday in the last week of May, and it came to a point because of a calendar. Priya called me at 4:12 that afternoon. "Two things," she said, and I could hear her walking. "Our motion for a temporary restraining order on the marital estate is on Judge Weller's docket Monday at 9, and Nadia flagged a scheduled outgoing wire on the Kestrel account. Monday, 10 a.m., 182,000 to a brokerage account opened 3 weeks ago. In whose name? Wire on the Kestrel account. Monday, 10 a.m., 182,000 to a brokerage account opened 3 weeks ago. In whose name? Carol Prewitt. I sat down on the edge of the tub because it was the closest surface. So if the judge signs at 9, if he signs at 9 and we serve the bank by 9:30, the wire dies. If anything slips, that money is in his mother's name and we spend 2 years and $40,000 trying to claw it back, and we probably get a third of it. What are the odds it slips?" She was quiet for a second, which from a lawyer is an answer. "Weller has a long docket Monday," she said. 64 hours. That's what I had. And in the middle of those 64 hours, on Sunday at 6 p.m., there was a family dinner at Carol's house that I had been formally, coldly, invited to by text from my own husband 4 days earlier. Sunday 6. "Moms, you will apologize to Bree. This is not a negotiation. If you can't do that, we'll talk about living arrangements." Priya said, "Don't go." She listed reasons. Optics, provocation, judges hate theatrics, and 90 seconds in, I stopped hearing her because I was looking at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, a 41-year-old woman on the edge of a tub in a hospital badge and a cardigan, thinking about 3 people. Marcus Ferraro, who would find out at some point in the next 2 weeks through a lawyer in a deposition that his wife took his children's college accounts from a stranger in a room with a court reporter. Gerald, who would find out from a subpoena that his wife of 19 years had forged his name 4 times. And Alyssa Crane, who already knew, and who had asked me exactly one thing when we talked. Does his family know about Theo? Because Theo has met them. Theo calls Carol Nana. And I thought, if I let this happen the legal way, the clean way, the way that plays well in front of Judge Weller, every single one of them finds out alone. In a room full of professionals from a document, they deserve to find out the same way I did, standing up at a table, with the person who did it to them close enough to touch. "I'm going," I said. Priya sighed. "Then take your phone off silent. Don't record anyone without telling them. Don't touch anybody. And Tess, say one thing, whatever it is. One thing, and then leave the room. Every additional sentence is a sentence a defense attorney gets to read out loud. One thing. One thing." I spent Saturday doing the least dramatic thing imaginable. I packed a bag for 4 nights at Danai's, made 3 copies of the exhibit index, and texted Alyssa. Sunday might get loud. She wrote back, "Theo has a soccer thing at 10. Whatever happens, I'm not hiding him anymore." I want to say I lay awake plotting that night. I didn't. I lay awake because the last domestic act of my 8-year marriage had been folding my husband's laundry that morning out of pure muscle memory, and then standing there holding a warm shirt like an idiot. Sunday, 5:58 p.m., Carol's driveway. 4 cars, Marcus's white F-250 with the trailer hitch, Gerald's Buick, Bree's Pilot, Daniel's Tacoma, dent still in the tailgate. I sat in my car for 2 full minutes with my hands on the wheel at 10 and 2. Then I went in. They'd set the dining room, not the kitchen. That's how I knew it was a proceeding and not a dinner. Carol's good plates. 9 people. Carol, Gerald, Daniel, Bree, Marcus, Aunt Deb, and her husband Roy, and Owen and Lily at the end with a tablet propped between them. Nobody stood up when I came in. I sat in the chair they'd left, which was, of course, directly across from Bree. We got through the pot roast. That's a surreal sentence, and it's true. 22 minutes of passing dishes and discussing Owen's baseball and the storm that took a limb off the maple out front. I ate 4 bites. The whole time, my heart went like something trapped under a floorboard. Then Carol set her fork down, which was the signal, and Daniel cleared his throat. "So," he said, "I think everybody knows why we're all here." Aunt Deb put her hand on Roy's arm, the way people do at the movies. Daniel turned to me. He had his sales voice on. Warm, regretful, absolutely reasonable. "Tess, I've defended you to this family for 8 years. You embarrassed my sister in front of 50 people. You've said things about my mother I won't repeat at this table. So here's where we are." He put both palms flat on the tablecloth. "Apologize to my sister or get out of my house." My house. Owen looked up from the tablet. Lily was drawing on a napkin with a purple marker. "Danny," Gerald said quietly. "Not in front of the kids. They're fine, Daniel." That was Carol. One word, and Gerald stopped talking, and I watched a 71-year-old man in his own dining living room, get put back in his chair by a syllable. Bree wouldn't look at me. She was looking at the salt shaker with an intensity you could have used to weld with. "I'm waiting," Daniel said. So I stood up, chair legs on hardwood. That sound. Everybody heard it. I did not look at Daniel. I turned and I faced Bree, my sister-in-law. 7 years of little job. 7 years of he settled. The woman who'd stood in my driveway barefoot with a shoebox and then texted me, "Please leave my family alone." And I said the one thing. "I'll apologize to you, Bree, the second you tell Marcus whose rent the Kestrel account has been paying since 2019, and Carol tells Gerald whose tuition she's been covering out of the Heartland money market with a signature that isn't his." That's it. That's the sentence. What strikes me about the next 4 seconds is how quiet it was. Nobody gasped. Nobody yelled. TV gets that wrong. Marcus said, "What?" Just normally, like he'd misheard someone pass the salt. Gerald said nothing at all. He picked up his phone, slid his glasses up, started tapping. That man opened the Heartland Credit Union app at his own dinner table with a plate of pot roast in front of him, and I watched his face do something I'll be seeing when I'm 80. Carol said, "Tessa, get out of my house." And it came out at almost a shout, and it was the first time in 8 years I'd heard her raise her voice, and it was the loudest confession anybody made all night. And Bree looked at Marcus and opened her mouth, and nothing came out. Daniel started laughing. That was his mistake. He actually laughed and spread his hands and said, okay. Everybody see what I've been dealing with? This is what I've been." "Who's Theo?" Marcus said. The room stopped. Because that name was not in my sentence. I never said it. I'd been that careful. Marcus turned to Bree and said it again, flat, the exhausted voice of a man who has been doing all the load-bearing for 11 years and just felt the beam go. "Bree, who is Theo? Because you had a birthday present for a Theo in the back of the car in October, and you told me it was a co-worker's kid, and I thought about that for about a week, and then I let it go." Bree started crying. That's all. She just started crying. At her mother's table, in front of her children, and never answered him, and everyone in that room did the math at the same speed. Aunt Deb said, "Carol?" in a small voice. Gerald put down his phone. He looked at his wife of 19 years and said, "4 times, Gerald, 4 times, Carol." Then he stood up, picked up his keys off the sideboard, and walked out of his own house. And the screen door hit the frame behind him like a gunshot. And that, not my sentence, not the crying, that sound, is what finally made Daniel stop smiling. I left 90 seconds later. One thing, then leave the room. For once in my life, I did what my lawyer told me. Lily was still coloring. Owen was watching his mother with an expression no 8-year-old should have to make. At the door, Daniel grabbed my arm, not hard, but he grabbed it, and said very quietly near my ear, "You have no idea what you just did." I said, "Judge Weller's courtroom, 9 a.m. You should probably call somebody." Monday, 9:04 a.m., Judge Weller signed the temporary restraining order. Priya's paralegal, a woman named Ruth, who has been doing this for 31 years and does not miss, was standing in the lobby of the credit union in Hilliard at 9:26 with a certified copy. The wire was scheduled for 10. It never left. What happened after is less cinematic and much more permanent, which is generally how it goes. The Kestrel invoices ended Daniel, and I didn't have to lift a finger. Priya's subpoena to Mid-Ohio Surgical Supply asked one question: "Is Kestrel Consulting Group a vendor of yours?" Their general counsel came back in 6 days with an answer and a question of her own for Daniel's employer. My husband had submitted $61,000 in temporary housing and per diem reimbursements over 4 years for an apartment that housed his son. He was terminated for cause on June 19th, not laid off. Cause. That evaporated $137,000 in unvested commissions, and it put the file in front of the Delaware County Prosecutor's Office, where it landed on the desk of Detective Ray Mosley, 14 years financial crimes, a man who returns phone calls, which I didn't know detectives did. Mosley interviewed me for 2 hours and 11 minutes. At the end, he closed his folder and said, "Ma'am, most people bring me a shoebox. You brought me a chain of custody. I've thought about that compliment more than I should." In February, Daniel pled to 1 count of theft by deception, 5 years community control, $61,000 in restitution, and a felony record that follows him into every sales job he applies for now, in an industry that runs background checks because you walk into hospitals. Carol was never charged. I'll be honest about that, because the internet always wants handcuffs. The prosecutor declined. Her age, no priors, and the fact that the only complaining witness would have to be her own husband. Gerald declined to be that witness. He did something else. He filed on August 3rd, 19 years and 4 months in, and because the $40,000 left a jointly titled retirement account on a forged authorization, his attorney didn't have much work to do. Carol kept her car. Gerald kept the house on a dare, which was his before her anyway. She's in a 1-bedroom in Reynoldsburg now, telling people at church that her daughter-in-law destroyed the family over a misunderstanding. Marcus filed in July and got primary custody of Owen and Lily in a hearing that ran under an hour because his attorney submitted the 529 records and Bree's attorney had nothing useful to say about them. That was the moment, not the affair, not the laundering. A judge looked at a woman who took $1,800 out of her 8-year-old's and 5-year-old's college accounts and decided in 90 seconds. Bree works at a call center in Grove City now. She sends me a text roughly every 11 weeks. They're all versions of the same one. I read them. I don't answer. My divorce finalized in November. And the house, this is the part that still makes me laugh out loud in the car. The house was never his. The $96,000 down payment came from my father's life insurance in 2017. It went in as separate property, and pre-approved it in 4 minutes with a wire confirmation and a death certificate. Judge Weller awarded me the residence outright and entered a judgment of $118,300 against Daniel for dissipation of marital assets. I don't really care about the money. I care that it's on paper, forever, in a public record, that the man who told 50 people I was obsessed with money took $214,000 from me. Get out of my house, he said. He said that in his mother's dining room in May. In November, he moved into a 1-bedroom in Whitehall. Alyssa filed for support in September. The DNA came back at 99.99%, which surprised precisely no one who'd seen the cowlick. She got a retroactive order and back support, and I gave a 2-page affidavit for her case, which I'd have done for free and which they sent me a thank you note for anyway. She and I are not friends. People love that ending, and it isn't ours. Twice a year, we get coffee at a Panera off 23 and say things neither of us can say to anybody who wasn't there. And ours. Twice a year, we get coffee at a Panera off 23 and say things neither of us can say to anybody who wasn't there. Once she said, "He told me you were unstable." And I said, "He told me you were a client property." And we laughed so hard the woman at the next table moved. Theo is 7 now. He knows he has a dad who lives somewhere else and comes on some weekends. He doesn't know the rest, and won't for a long time. Alyssa and I agree on exactly one thing without ever having discussed it. None of this was ever, at any point, that child's fault. Dr. Halverson asked me in January what I'd learned. I gave her a therapist's answer at the time. Here's the real one. I learned that the cruelest thing that family ever did to me wasn't the money and wasn't the second house. It was the 7 years of small, deniable dinner table training that taught me my own attention was a defect. Carol never had to lie to me directly. She just had to make sure that every time I noticed something true, I got embarrassed for noticing it. Do that 140 Sundays in a row, and you can build a woman who will look at a $31,000 hole in her own savings account and wonder what's wrong with her. Gerald and I have dinner every couple of months. He apologized once, badly and at length, over meatloaf, for all the times he shrugged instead of speaking, and I told him the truth, that the shrug was the only reason I made it through some of those Sundays. The house is mine. I repainted the dining room in March. It was a beige Carol picked out for us in 2018, and I put it in the past tense with 2 coats of a deep green I chose by myself, in a store, alone, on a Tuesday. The dog stayed. Her name is Pilot. She's 11, and she doesn't miss him even slightly, and I still have the shoebox. Nadia's report is in a fireproof box in the closet. The exhibit copies live in a banker's box in the basement labeled, in Priya's paralegal's handwriting, Pre-Wit, closed. But the shoebox itself, the actual Nike box, is on the top shelf of the hall closet, empty, and I know exactly why I keep it. And it isn't sentiment, it's the lid. Because a 6-year-old boy drew his whole world on that lid in crayon. His mom, himself, a gray truck, a yellow house, and then, up in the corner, because it was simply a true and ordinary fact of his life the way rain is, he drew a second little house and labeled it in the shaky block letters of a kid who's just learned that letters mean things. Dad's other house. 7 years, 3 marriages, $214,000, 1 felony, a forged signature, 3 grandchildren who will grow up in split households, and 1 welfare check on a Tuesday night that I will feel in my stomach for the rest of my life, and a child with a green crayon summed the entire thing up in 3 crayon words before any of the adults could say it out loud. He wasn't wrong either. There was always another house. He just got the label backwards. It was mine.